Sources of information in this documentary comes from Louise Ammons Cosby's book, Cheatwood Kin, and Perry Portraits, authored by Mildred Perry Miller. The complete story of the Cheatwood family in America would be impossible to tell. After all, the Cheatwoods have been here since, and possibly before, the 1600s. And while the oldest known Cheatwood in America was William Cheatwood, mentioned in a 1636 deed in Lancaster County, Virginia, no estate records are available to indicate which, if any, of his descendants is our ancestor. Although the name is spelled in various ways, even now, a prominent early American Cheatwood is mentioned in the William and Mary Quarterly magazine from October of 1938. According to its author, Dr. Blanche Haynes, the Cheatwood family of England is an old Saxon name going back to the time of William the Conqueror. In the article, Dr. Haynes tells of a Thomas Cheatwood of London, England. Thomas was a merchant and emigrated to Lancaster County, Virginia in the mid-1600s. Under English rule in 1660, Virginia Governor William Berkeley appoints Thomas Cheatwood as a surveyor. The British Crown wanted to expand its colonies in America, so head rights were given. In effect, Cheatwood and others were rewarded with large land grants when they brought immigrants to America. In 1667, Thomas Cheatwood and his business partner, Major William Ball, brought in 32 settlers. They were awarded 1,600 acres, most of it on the north side of Rappahannock River. Thomas Cheatwood traveled back and forth to England several times to persuade families to return to America with the promise of large homesteads. Grants totaling more than 15,000 acres for transporting immigrants appear with Thomas Cheatwood's name on them. When Thomas Cheatwood died in 1678, he died without a will. He had children, but their names are not mentioned in court documents. Only his wife, Elizabeth, Edward Carter, Robert Newsom, Walter Wallace, and court attorney William Ball are shown in the settlement of his estate. Researchers believe that this Thomas Cheatwood had a son, Thomas II, who was mentioned in a 1720 deed in Lancaster County, Virginia. Other court documents at the time mention a Berkeley Cheatwood, Turner Cheatwood, and his children Betty, George, William, and Rachel. There were at least 3 Thomas Cheatwoods in England at the time, but the deceased Thomas Cheatwood of Lancaster County, Virginia, is believed to have been the son of a Henry Cheatwood, a haberdasher of London. Most, if not all, of these Cheatwoods are related. Researchers just aren't sure how. Without a paper trail of estate settlements, wills, or deeds listing names and relationships, it's practically impossible to determine ancestry. Mathias Cheatwood is the exception. We know his descendants, and every Cheatwood born in Alabama is probably one of them. Mathias was born in England in 1681. About 14 years old at the time, he arrived in Virginia in 1695. Some speculate that he was planning to join his father, who was already in Virginia, but had died before his arrival. Mathias married Mary Key in Northumberland County, Virginia. He was given a land patent in July of 1741 in Goochland County, Virginia. Early Northumberland County records show that Mathias was a constable. According to his will, Mathias Cheatwood and Mary had 5 children. Mathias Cheatwood Jr., born around 1714, William Cheatwood, born about 1716, John Cheatwood, born 1718, James Cheatwood, born about 1720, and Richard Cheatwood, born about 1722. Brothers James and Richard would eventually move to Rutherford County, North Carolina. Descendants of James claim that he spent time in Bedford County, Virginia, as a surveyor before moving to North Carolina. The 3 remaining brothers, Mathias Jr., William and John Cheatwood spent the rest of their lives in Virginia. Most of these brothers and their descendants spelled their name Cheatwood. Not William, though. His descendants can usually be distinguished by the spelling of Cheatwood. William's wife's name was Jean, last name unknown. What is known, though, is that Jean came from an old Huguenot family driven from France in the 16th century. William inherited 100 acres from his father's estate. He then bought 200 acres from his brother Richard. According to the Daughters of the American Revolution, William Cheatwood supported the Patriots in Powhatan County, Virginia, by providing beef for the Patriot Army. Just as the Civil War would fracture some families, with some brothers choosing the Confederacy and others fighting for the Union, the Revolutionary War appears to have done the same for Mathias Cheatwood's family. According to Rutherford County, North Carolina documents, James Cheatwood was jailed in the 96th District of South Carolina in 1779. Shadrach Cheatwood and Moses Cheatwood, believed to have been his sons, were also imprisoned. Accused of sedition and supporting the British Army, they were fined and sentenced to 34 days in an Orangeburg, South Carolina jail. From there, it only got worse. By late September of 1780, James Cheatwood was a captain in the British Army. By the end of the first day in the Battle of Kings Mountain in York County, South Carolina, Captain James Cheatwood and 8 other Tories had been captured. Author Lyman Draper, in his book Kings Mountain and Its Heroes, described it this way: "They were swung off the gallows oak, 3 at a time, and left suspended at the place of execution. According to Lieutenant Allaire's account, they died like soldiers, like martyrs in their own and friends' estimation. These brave but unfortunate loyalists," says Allaire, "with their latest breath expressed their unutterable detestation of the rebels and of their base and infamous proceedings, and as they were being turned off, extolled their king and the British government. Mills, Wilson, and Cheatwood died like Romans." The poor loyalist leaders had been left swinging from the sturdy oak upon which they had been executed. No sooner had the wigs moved off than Mrs. Martha Bickerstaff, the wife of Captain Aaron Bickerstaff, who had served under Ferguson, had been mortally wounded at Kings Mountain. With the assistance of an old man who worked at the farm, cut down the 9 dead bodies. 8 of them were buried in a shallow trench, some 2 feet deep, while the remains of Captain Cheatwood were conveyed by some of his friends on a plank half a mile away to Benjamin Bickerstaff's, where they were interred on a hill still used as a graveyard. James's brother, William, would die 7 years later in Powhatan County, Virginia. In William Cheatwood's will, recorded in Scottsville, Friday, August 17, 1787, 14 children are listed: Billy, Daniel, Lottie or Lancelot, Alexander, and 9 daughters: Claire, Sella, Rachel, Becky, Alice, Patience, Polly, Charity, and Betty. At the time of his death, 4 of William and Jean Cheatwood's children are minors, including Lancelot, or known as Lottie. Lottie was born about 1772 in Cumberland County, Virginia. It was his father's desire that, after his death, all his underage children would be bound to some sort of trade. Lancelot was bound to a man named Thomas, who was supposed to teach him how to be a millwright. When Thomas left Virginia a couple of years later, the courts ordered that Lottie come under the tutelage of Richard Bernard to learn carpentry. Very little documentation can be found on Lottie Cheatwood. Shortly after he marries Mary Mayo, we see him in Caswell County, North Carolina, in 1798. Caswell County was the setting for Alex Haley's miniseries, Roots. In October of 1798, Mary's father, Robert Mayo, purchases property in Caswell County on the south side of the North Fork of Moon Creek. It's quite possible that Lancelot and his family lived in this area too. The next time we see Lancelot is in May 1818. He's in Union County, South Carolina, serving as a juror. Lottie will spend several years in this area and nearby Chester County. In the fall of 1825, we see Lottie in an unfortunate situation. Authorities in Chester District, South Carolina, have issued an indictment against Lancelot Cheatwood, Alexander and Robert Cheatwood, that's Lottie's two sons, and Thomas Moore, Lottie's son-in-law. Along with others, the Cheatwoods have been accused of setting sharpened stakes out around their fields to prevent the neighbors' hogs from rooting up their potatoes and vegetables. This was long before barbed wire, and split-rail fences were hardly a deterrent to hungry hogs and other livestock. The result was that 2 of the neighbors' hogs were killed and several more wounded. Initially, a $100 fine was levied against Lottie. By the end of March of 1826, all charges had been dropped. In his mid-50s at the time, Lottie is never heard from again. In the 1830 Chester County census, his widow, Mary Mayo Cheatwood, is shown, as well as his second oldest son, Robert R. Cheatwood. The children's ages are shown, but there are no names given with them. Lottie's oldest son, Pleasant, is believed to have been living in Hall County, Georgia, at that time of the 1830 census. Through the years, there's been some disagreement over the names of Lottie's children and grandchildren. There's no disagreement, though, regarding a story which has been passed down through all of Lottie's male descendants. Family legend has it that Robert R. Cheatwood and 3 of his brothers came to Alabama from South Carolina, each of them settling on different creeks. Originally called Benton County, there were several name changes before it became Cleburne County in 1866. Felton Cheatwood claimed that one of the brothers, Pleasant Cheatwood, got into an argument with his brothers and became angry, so much in fact that he left Cleburne County and decided to change the spelling of his last name back to Chitwood. By 1850, Pleasant Cheatwood had moved to Cherokee County, Alabama. Shortly after the turn of the 20th century, Robert R. Cheatwood's son, Robert, wrote down the names of Lottie's children and their birth dates. Living in Cleburne County at the time, Macduff claimed he was born in 1838. That was the year that the Cheatwood family moved from South Carolina to Alabama. Lottie's children would have been Macduff's aunts and uncles. In 2006, this document was given to Pat Cheatwood of White Plains, Alabama. A few years later, I visited with Pat and he showed me the document. These are the names. Lottie's children in order are Catherine Cheatwood, Patsy Williamson Cheatwood, Martha Cheatwood, Pleasant Cheatwood, Harriet Cheatwood, Robert R. Cheatwood, Alexander J. Cheatwood, Jane Lindsay Cheatwood, Margaret Richardson Cheatwood, Polly Mason Cheatwood, William Madison James Cheatwood, John D. Cheatwood, Martin Cheatwood, Rebecca Cheatwood, and Caroline Cheatwood. Another story passed down was that one of Robert Cheatwood's children died during the 1838 trip from South Carolina to Alabama. Traveling in wagons, there was no choice but to stop and bury the child alongside the road. Pat Cheatwood's document shows the names of Robert's children. One boy's name has never been accounted for and is probably the child left behind. Green Cheatwood was born April 15th, 1824 in South Carolina. He would have been about 14 when he died during the trip. Robert Macduff Cheatwood's early experiences in Cleburne County, Alabama was documented in a Sunday edition of the Anniston Star newspaper in February of 1919. When Pat Cheatwood read the headline that said, "Alabamian has lived 80 years on same farm but in 3 different counties," referencing the fact that Cleburne County had several name changes, Pat scoffed. He said he didn't either. He moved out west for a while, then he came back. Well, not mentioning names, Pat remembered the story of one of the early Cheatwoods who apparently lived a double life. He had a family out west and one in Edwardsville. 6 months out of the year he'd work out west, and the other 6 he came back to Cleburne County and worked. No one knew anything about it until the family in Cleburne County got a call from the family out west. Not all stories are colorful, but they're just as interesting. Felton Cheatwood would tell the story of how his grandfather, William Madison James Cheatwood, got into a fight over a poker game. Billy, as he was called, had caught the guy cheating, so Billy hit him, so hard in fact that it broke his neck and killed him. A jury sentenced Billy to hang. Billy's sister named Peggy because Felton said she had a pegged leg, and Billy's mother rode off to Montgomery to get a pardon from the governor. Riding day and night, Peggy and her mother returned just in time to save Billy from the gallows. Robert Cheatwood, who lives in Georgia and is a descendant of Robert R. Cheatwood, had never heard the story, but he had heard some stories about his ancestor, Robert R. Cheatwood. When one particular Union soldier came up missing, well, relatives suspected that he might be found in Robert's backyard. Another story is that one of Billy's sons, Madison Cheatwood, married a Creek Indian squaw and lived with her. When some drunken white men killed an Indian boy from the tribe, an Indian friend told Cheatwood it would be best if he left the area, and he did, moving all the way, eventually, to Louisiana. There's no way to know if all or some of these stories are true, but one thing is certain. The children of Lottie Cheatwood were quite bountiful. Some chose to stay in Cleburne County, and some chose to go west. William Madison James Cheatwood would have 11 children: William Marion, Amanda, Madison, Rebecca, Thompson, Jasper, Mary, James, Thomas, Rena, and Lavinia. When Lucius Felton Cheatwood married Aurella Desi Cheatwood in 1917, he was marrying his first cousin once removed. They were both descendants of William Madison James Cheatwood, but through two different sons of William Madison. Felton's father was Thomas Jefferson Cheatwood, who was a son of William Madison. Aurella's father was William Chandler Cheatwood, who was the son of Thompson M. Cheatwood, who was the son of William Madison. There's no telling how many of Felton and Aurella's descendants have tried to figure that one out.
This here is, well, Grandpa gave this land right here for this cemetery, which is my mother's daddy, and his people was buried in this area, in this over here. And Lois, his son, was brought me over here to show me his grandpa's grave, and it was rocks. It was either one of these two graves. He couldn't remember which one, or didn't know which one, but he was buried either at this spot or this spot, or that spot over there. But I come to believe more that it was here.
There's a rock there that says something, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we can't make out the name on it, or if it's a date or it's a name, but it does have writing on it. I don't know. Can your camera pick up then? But
here, show us the other place it might be, but you don't.
It is standing right here at this gray spot here, which is kinfolks. This Easterwood is Easterwood here is was Daddy's aunt. Venie Easterwood was this right over here was my mother's daddy's brother, Luther Cheatwood.
Where's that again?
Right here, Luther. You want me to move them flowers?
Yeah.
It was Luther. When I come out here as a kid, he had a little house right there behind Grandpa's. I'd go up there, and first place I'd go to be see Uncle Luther. And I'd always eat dinner with him because I had peanut butter and banana sandwiches. We went fishing trip after fishing trip when I'd come out here. And he'd walk around and show me over here to this graveyard and show me the graves and the people, the sights and things. I just wished I could remember everything he told me about this.
What do you remember about him?
Luther? Oh, he was a bachelor. He never did marry. But Grandpa had a little old house out behind his house that Luther lived in and stayed in. And every time I come out here, I had to see Luther because we went fishing. We'd fish on these creeks and catch them old suckers, fishes and things. But it was more fun to be with him and him tell things about things that was happening out here. It was just so much enjoyable.
Of all of them, how many people here do you remember, as far as his being buried here? How many people do you remember?
I got an aunt and uncle buried here, up under this grave over here. I got a grandma and a grandpa buried right yonder on the hillside.
Now, the grandpa and grandma on your mom or daddy's side?
On my mother's side.
Okay.
And then her brother Lois is buried up there. The place where it's bricked in. We'll get a closer up after a while on it. And then there's Aunt Vina Hill. I remember her. She'd come to visit us. And I remember, very well remember Luther and that. And Uncle Waddy and Aunt Ada, which was my mother's aunt. And she married a Thompson, and Neil Thompson and his people lived in this area. And I don't know how many more I know in here. Pilgrims, I know some of the pilgrims that lived out here at that time. I don't know how many people in this graveyard is, but it brings back old memories.
Tell me about the first time you remember coming here, Rudy.
Oh, I was probably 4 or 5 years old. We came here and they had it's sort of like a decoration and an all-day Sunday meeting. They had singing. They even had a dinner on the ground out here. It was, just a little old bitty fella. And I remember they singing those Fossil Life songs, and it's old cars, wagons, mules is here. It's many, many years ago. But
would that have been in the 50s?
That would have been, I was born in 42. I was probably 5. It'd probably been 47, 48 year old. 1948.
Do you remember who your mom and daddy knew here, or what their connection was?
All I know is they said that the Cheatwoods owned this place, owned this property, and they gave it to the church. Ancestors did, and I don't know if he's anybody that's buried here or anything, because there's not, like I said, there's nothing but rocks for markers, and I can't remember any other than that. George, think about them trees that they got them beams out of. They had to be tall ones, didn't they? Yeah, these are later ones, but these here has got to be the original ones. These benches here have got to be. Ooh.
Old days, what kind of lights did you use?
We used coal oil lights.
Okay. When fabrics were clothes made of, what fabrics were the clothes made of?
Well, cotton is woven and wool. They had looms, and they had spinning wheels, and they had to spin the thread, and then they put it in. They made the cloth, and then they cut the cloth up and made the suits by the hand. by hand.
Was the clothing easier or harder to take care of?
The clothes was, well, one thing about it, you didn't have to starch them and iron them.
Okay. Okay. What sort of washing machine did you have?
Well, we had a tub and a bench made up there out there, kind of like a little table and a battling stick, and we'd boil the clothes in a black wash pot, and after we boiled them, we'd take them out of the pot and battle them and put them in the tub and rinse them and hang them up.
Okay. What kind of stove and what kind of fuel did you use in your family for cooking?
Well, anything we could get. Chickens, squirrels, rabbits.
No, what kind of stove did you use?
What kind of stove? Well, a lot of them cooked on the fireplace. Didn't have any stove.
Okay, what kind of fuel did you use?
Yo,
Wood?
to start with, since you got where you know, with just oven and lead, wasn't it?
Yeah.
My daddy got the first stove that was got in the valley. We just cooked on the fireplace, a little step stove they called it. Folks had come to see it.
Okay. And what kind of fuel did you use?
Wood?
Okay. Next question. Did you have a refrigerator?
No, ma'am.
How did you keep your food fresh?
Well, we'd carry it and put it in the spring, put it in a earth in a jar, a pitcher or something, and tie it up, fasten it where nothing can
Over
get in
here
it,
again,
and put it in the spring.
over here again, where Harvey lived at Orange City, some of them at the church went to town and they had got to making ice, and he come back as in August and told it, and they turned them out for coming and lying. They called it lying because they said they in August the seed ice, and they appointed a committee to go, and they come back and poured it, and he said they turned them out.
Okay.
Lying.
Was food packaged when it came from the store? Was it packaged, the food?
Was what?
The food packaged when it came from the store.
No, we raised our food back then.
Okay. What did milk come in back then?
Well, cow's bagel. I had to milk cows.
Okay. What sort of soap did you use?
Homemade soap.
Okay. Did it clean as well as cleaners we have now?
Yeah, sometimes they clean cleaner.
Okay. How was your water heated for bathing and laundry?
Oh, put it in an old black kettle and set it on the fireplace.
Okay. Back then, did your family have a car?
No, ma'am.
How did they travel?
Well, they traveled in a wagon and steers or mules or horses.
How'd you get to school?
How to get to school, walked.
Okay. Did you have a radio back then?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Oh,
Someone heard about it.
What kind of entertainment did you have?
oh Lord, toting in wood and stove wood and getting water in at night and one thing and another. Lord, everything could be thought of.
Did you ever go to the movies?
No, didn't know what a movie was.
Okay. Okay. In what ways is life to you more enjoyable than we have electricity now, like plastic, detergent, and other natural gas and products?
Oh, that's a hard question. You'll have to read it again.
Okay. In what way is life more enjoyable now that we have electricity, plastics, detergents, and natural gases?
Oh, well, it's not as hard. Life's not as hard now as it was back in them days. But back in those days, it was more enjoyable.
Okay. In what ways did you like the good old days better?
Oh, a lot of ways, lot of ways, lot of ways.
Name some.
Well, you get to stay at home, you get to play, and then you don't do nothing but get out and go and rip and romp and boat ride and do this thing and that thing, and it's not enjoyable like it was back then.
Okay, this was Arilla Cheatwood, and how old are you?
93.
Okay, thank you.
I'm 94. And back then, they called it darning. She had a loom, and every thread had a hole, and the pedal would push it, and they'd raise them up that way, and the shuttle, they called it, with a thread in it, they'd throw it through, and then they'd mash the pedal, and they'd pull it up the other way, and then they had some fingers that would push it up, and that's the way they made the cloth. And when they wanted it colored, they'd take red oak bark and dye the thread. And yeah, the first stove that Paul bought it down in the valley, it was a little step stove. It had an apron out here. You raked the ashes out in it. Folks would come to see it. It was a rare thing. Cook on the fireplace in the oven. Ooh, what happy days.